Chapter 10 Travels Without the Sun.
"Who's there?" shouted the three travelers. "I am the warden of the marches of Underland, and with me stand 100 Earthmen in arms," came the reply. "Tell me quickly who you are and what is your errand in the deep realm." "We fell down by accident," said Puddleglum, truthfully enough. "Many fall down and few return to the sunlight lands," said the voice. "Make ready now to come with me to the Queen of the Deep Realm." "What does she want with us?" asked Scrub cautiously. "I don't know," said the voice. "Her will is not to be questioned but obeyed." While he said these words, there was noise like a soft explosion, and immediately a cold light, gray with a little blue in it, flooded the cavern. All hope that the speaker had been idly boasting when he spoke of his 100 armed followers died at once. Jill found herself blinking and staring at the dense crowd. They were all sizes, from little gnomes barely a foot high to stately figures taller than men. All carried three-pronged spears in their hands and were dreadfully pale, and all stood as still as statues. Apart from that, they were very different. Some had tails and others not. Some wore great beards and others had very round, smooth faces, big as pumpkins. There were long, pointed noses and long, soft noses, like small trunks, and great, blobby noses. Several had horns in the middle of their foreheads, but in one respect they were all alike. Every face in the whole 100 was as sad as a face could be. They were so sad that after the first glance Jill almost forgot to be afraid of them. She felt she would like to cheer them up. "Well," said Puddleglum, rubbing his hands, "this is just what I needed. If these chaps don't teach me a very serious view of life, I don't know what will. Look at that fellow with the walrus mustache, or the one with the—" "Get up," said the leader of the Earthmen. There was nothing else to be done. The three travelers scrambled to their feet and joined hands. One wanted the touch of a friend's hand at a moment like that, and the Earthmen came round them, patting a large, soft feet, of which some had 10 toes, some 12, and others none. "March," said the warden, and march they did. The cold light came from a large bell on the top of a long pole, and the tallest of gnomes carried this at the head of the procession. By its cheerless rays, they could see that they were in a natural cavern. The walls and the roof were knobbed, twisted and gashed into thousands of fantastic shapes, and the stony floor sloped downwards as they proceeded. It was worse for Jill than for the others, because she hated the dark, underground places, and when, as they went on, the cavern got lower and narrower, and when at last the light-bearer stood still and the gnomes one by one stooped down, all except the very smallest ones, and stepped into the little dark crack and disappeared, she felt she could bear it no longer. "I can't go in there! I can't, I won't!" she panted. The Earthmen said nothing, but they all lowered their spears and pointed them at her. "Steady, Pole," said Puddleglum. "Those big fellows wouldn't be crawling in there if it didn't get wider later on. And there's one thing about this underground work. We shan't get any rain." "Oh, you don't understand. I can't," wailed Jill. "Think how I felt on that— Oh, crap. Think how I felt on that cliff, Pole," said Scrub. "You go first, Puddleglum, and I'll go after her." "That's right," said the Marshmallow, getting down on his hands and knees. "You keep a grip of my heels, Pole, and Scrub will hold on to yours. Then we'll all be comfortable." "Comfortable?" said Jill, but she got down and they crawled on their elbows. It was a nasty place. You had to go flat on your face for what seemed like half an hour, though it may have really only been 5 minutes. It was hot. Jill felt she was being smothered, but at last a dim light showed ahead. The tunnel grew wider and higher, and they came out hot, dirty, and shaken into a cave so large that it scarcely seemed like a cave at all. It was full of a dim, drowsy radiance, so that here they had no need of the Earthman's strange lantern. The floor was soft with some kind of moss, and out of this grew many strange shapes, branched and tall like trees, but flabby like mushrooms. They stood too far apart to make a forest. It was more like a park. The light, a greenish gray, seemed to come both from them and from the moss, and it was not strong enough to reach the roof of the cave, which might have been a very long way overhead. Across the mild, soft, sleepy place they were now made to march. It was very sad, but with quite a sort of sadness like soft music. Here they passed dozens of strange animals lying on the turf, either dead or asleep. Jill could not tell which. They were mostly of dragonish or bat-like sort. Puddleglum did not know what any of them were. "Do they grow here?" Scrub asked the warden. He seemed very surprised at being spoken to, but he replied no. These are all beasts that have found their way down by chasms and caves and out of overland into the deep realm. Many come down, and few return to the sunlit lands. It is said that they will all wake at the end of the world. His mouth shut like a box when he said this, and in the great silence of the cave the children felt that they would not dare speak again. The bare feet of the gnomes padding on the deep moss made no sound. There was no wind, there were no birds, and there was no sound of water. There was no sound of breathing from the strange beasts. When they had walked for several miles, they came to the wall of rock, and in a low archway leading into another cavern. It was not, however, so bad as the last entrance, and Jill could go through without bending her head. It brought them into a smaller cave, long and narrow, about the size and shape of a cathedral. And here, filling almost the whole length of it, lay an enormous man fast asleep. He was far bigger than any of the giants, and his face was not like a giant's, but noble and beautiful. His breast rose and fell gently under the snowy beard which covered him to the waist. A pure silver light, no one saw where it came from, rested on him. "Who's that?" asked Puddleglum. It was so long since anyone had spoken, and Jill wondered how he had the nerve. "That is old Father Time, who once was a king in Overland," said the warden, "and now he has sunk down into the deep realm and lies dreaming of all the things that are done in the upper world. Many sink down and few return to sunlit lands. They say he will wake at the end of the world." And out of the cave they passed into another, and then into another, and so on till Jill lost count. But always they were going downhill, and each cave was lower than the last, till the very thought of the weight and depth of the earth was above you was suffocating. At last they came to a place where the warden commanded his cheerless lantern to be lit again. Then they passed into a cave so wide and dark that they could see nothing of it, except that right in front of them a strip of pale sand ran down into the still water. And there, beside a little jetty, lay a ship without a mast or sail, but with many oars. They were made to go on board her, and led forward to the bows, where there was a clear space in front of the rower's bench, and a seat running round the inside the bulwarks. One thing I'd like to know," said Puddleglum, "is whether anyone from our world, from up atop, I mean, has ever done this trip before." "Many have taken ship at the pale beaches," replied the warden, "and—" "Yes, I know," interrupted Puddleglum, "and few return to the sunlit lands. You needn't say it again. You are a chap of one idea, aren't you?" The children huddled close together on each side of Puddleglum. They thought him a wet blanket while they were still above ground, but down here he seemed like the only comfortable thing they had. Then the pale lantern was hung up amidships. The earthmen set to the oars, and the ship began to move. The lantern cast its light only a very short way. Looking ahead, they could see nothing but smooth, dark water fading into absolute blackness. "Oh, whatever will become of us?" said Jill despairingly. "Now, don't let your spirits down, Paul," said the Marshwiggle. "There's one thing you've got to remember. We're right back on the right lines. We're to go under the ruined city, and we are under it. We're following the instructions again." Presently they were given food, flat, flabby cakes of some sort which had hardly any taste, and after that they gradually fell asleep. But when they woke, everything was just the same. The gnomes still rowing, the ship still gliding on, still dead blackness ahead. How often they woke and slept and ate and slept again, none of them could ever remember. And the worst thing about it was that you began to feel as though you've always lived on that ship in the darkness, and to wonder whether sun and blue skies and wind and birds had not only been a dream. They had almost given up hope or being afraid about anything when at last they saw lights ahead. Dreary lights, like that of the lantern. Then, quite suddenly, one of these lights came close, and they saw that they were passing another ship. And after that they met several ships. Then, still staring till their eyes hurt, they saw something that some of the lights ahead were shining on, what looked like wharves, walls, towers, and moving crowds. But still there was hardly any noise. "By Jove," said Scrub, "a city!" And as soon as they all saw that he was right. But it was a queer city. The lights were so few and far apart that they would hardly have done for scattering cottages in our world. But the little bits of the place which you could see by the lights were like glimpses of great seaport. You could make out in one place a whole crowd of ships loading or unloading, in another bales of stuff in warehouses, in a third walls and pillars that suggested great palaces or temples, and always, wherever the light fell, endless crowds, hundreds of Earthmen, jostling one another as they padded softly around their business in narrow streets, broad squares, or up in great flights of steps. Their continued movement made a sort of soft murmuring noise as the ship drew nearer and nearer, but there was not a song or shout or bell or the rattle of a wheel anywhere. The city was as quiet, as nearly as dark as the inside of an anthill. At last, their ship was brought along a quay and made fast. The three travelers were taken ashore and marched up to the city. Crowds of Earthmen, no two alike, rubbed shoulders with them in the crowded streets, and the sad light fell on many sad and grotesque faces. But no one showed any interest in the strangers. Every gnome seemed to be as busy as it was sad. Though Jill never found what it was they were so busy about. But the endless moving, shoving, hurrying, and soft pad, pad, pad went on. And at last they came to what appeared to be a great castle, though a few of the windows in it were lighted. Here they were taken in and made to cross a courtyard and to climb many staircases. This brought them, in the end, to a great murky-lit room. But in one corner of it, oh joy, there was an archway filled with quite a different sort of light. The honest, yellowish, warm light of such a lamp as humans use. What showed by this light inside the archway was a foot of a staircase, which wound upward between the walls of stone. The light seemed to come from the top. 2 Earthmen stood one on each side of the ark, like sentries or footmen. The warden went up to these 2 and said, as if it were a password, "Many sink down to the underworld, and few return to the sunlit lands." They answered, as if it were the countersign. Then all 3 put their heads together and talked. And at last one of the 2 gnomes in waiting said, "I tell you the Queen's Grace is gone from hence on her great affair. We had best keep these top dwellers in strait prison till her homecoming. Few return to the sunlit lands." At that moment, the conversation was interrupted by what seemed to Jill the most delightful noise in the world. It came from above, from the top of the staircase, and it was a clear, ringing, perfectly human voice, the voice of a young man. "What coil are you keeping down there?" Mulla Guthrum shouted. "Overworlders, ha! Bring them to me, and that presently." "Please it your highness to remember," began Mulla Guthrum, but the voice had cut him short. "It pleases my highness principally to be obeyed, old mutterer. Bring them up," it called. Mulla Guthrum shook his head, motioned the travelers to follow, and began going up the staircase. At every step the light increased. There was rich tapestries hanging on the walls. The lamplight shone golden through the thin curtains at the staircase head. The Earthmen parted the curtains and stood aside. The 3 passed in. They were in a beautiful room, richly tapestried, with bright fire on clean hearth, and red wine and cut glass sparkling in the table. A young man with fair hair rose to greet them. He was handsome and looked both bold and kind.